I protected my sister from Uncle Chester for 8 years by taking her place every time he babysat. So when I finally told our family, she called me a liar and got custody of my 6-year-old daughter, then started dropping her off at Uncle Chester's house for babysitting until my cousin found him, taking her to the same basement, and the family finally realized I'd been telling the truth the whole time. I had just watched my sister tell our entire family that I was a liar and attention seeker for finally speaking up about Uncle Chester touching me. She's making it all up. Uncle Chester never touched anyone. She's just jealous of how close we were. The worst part was that she was right about one thing. He never touched her, because I made sure of it. For 8 years, I took her place every single time, and now she was calling me a liar in front of everyone. I was 7 when it started. Kayla was 5. Uncle Chester would babysit us when our parents worked late. The first time he tried to take Kayla to the basement for special games, I told him she had the flu. I went instead. After that night, I knew I could never let him near her. Every time he babysat, I locked Kayla in her room first. I told her it was a game where she had to stay hidden no matter what. I'd give her my iPad and snacks. Then I'd go downstairs and wait. When Uncle Chester showed up, I was always there, ready. So he never had to go looking for her. My parents never knew. They thought Uncle Chester was a godsend. He watched us for free. He brought gifts. He helped with homework. Kayla loved him because I made sure he only showed her his good side. The side that wasn't sick. The side that didn't hurt little girls in basements. Now we were adults and I'd finally gone to therapy. My therapist said it was time to tell the truth. She said the secret was calling me. But when I told my family last week, Kayla lost it. She screamed that I was destroying her perfect image of our childhood, that I was ruining her relationship with Uncle Chester, that I was lying for attention. My mother took her side immediately. She said Kayla was the successful one, the lawyer, the one with the perfect life. She said I'd always been dramatic, always making up stories, always trying to get attention. My father just sat there, shaking his head like he was disappointed in me. They threw me out of the house that night, but not before Kayla cornered me in the hallway. "You're sick," she said. "Uncle Chester showed me your old diary, the one where you wrote about wanting him to notice you. He said you tried to seduce him when you were 13, that he had to reject you and you've been bitter ever since." I felt my whole body go cold. There was no diary. I'd never written those things. But Uncle Chester had 8 years to plan for this. 8 years to prepare Kayla to defend him. 8 years to make me look crazy. The next month was hell. Kayla told everyone in our extended family that I was having a mental breakdown. She said I was making false accusations because I was jealous of her success. She posted pictures with Uncle Chester constantly. Lunches together, shopping trips, family dinners I was banned from attending. My aunt sent me angry texts about destroying the family. My cousins blocked me on social media. My grandmother called me crying, saying she couldn't believe she'd raised a liar. Even my childhood friends started pulling away after Kayla reached out to them with her version of events. The worst part was what happened with my daughter. After my family threw me out, I struggled to find stable housing. Kayla convinced a judge that I was having a mental health crisis. She used my abuse disclosure as evidence that I was delusional and unstable. She got temporary custody of my 6-year-old Maya while I was forced into therapy to prove my fitness as a mother. Then she started leaving Maya with Uncle Chester. She'd drop my daughter off at his house for babysitting. She'd post pictures of them together at the park. She'd write captions about what an amazing great uncle he was. When I tried to warn her, she filed a restraining order against me, said I was harassing her and trying to poison Maya against the family. I was completely alone. The family I'd protected had thrown me away. The sister I'd saved now had my daughter. Every sacrifice I'd made meant nothing. Every night in that basement had been for nothing. Kayla didn't just forget what I'd done. She rewrote it entirely and used it to take my child. But then something changed. My cousin Sarah called me crying. Her daughter had just disclosed something about Uncle Chester. She remembered how I'd always kept other kids away from him at family parties, how I'd always volunteered to help him with errands so the other cousins could stay home. She was starting to see the pattern. She wasn't the only one. My aunt's neighbor called. She'd seen something concerning through the window when Kayla dropped off Maya. 2 teenage cousins reached out separately. They'd noticed how Uncle Chester's behavior changed when parents weren't looking. They were starting to question Kayla's story. Then came the call that changed everything. It was my cousin Lily sobbing. "I saw Uncle Chester take Maya to the basement yesterday. Kayla wasn't there. I heard her crying. I called the police, but they needed more than what I saw. Please, I believe you now. Help me save her." I hung up with Lily, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Maya was in danger, right now, in that same basement where I'd spent 8 years protecting Kayla, the basement I'd sworn no other child would ever see. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Uncle Chester's house. The restraining order meant I couldn't go near Kayla, but it didn't mention Uncle Chester's property. My tires screeched as I pulled up outside. Through the window, I could see the living room was empty. No sign of Maya or Chester. The front door was locked. I ran around to the back, my heart pounding. The basement window was cracked open, just like it used to be when I was little. I dropped to my knees and peered inside. The room was dark, but I could hear Maya's voice. She was asking to go home. I called 911 while running back to my car. The operator took down the information, but warned me that without immediate danger, they couldn't enter the property. Lily had already called once. They needed more. My phone buzzed. Sarah had sent a group text to 5 other cousins. They were all heading to Chester's house. Within minutes, cars started pulling up. My cousin James arrived first, followed by our Aunt Patricia. Even my father's brother showed up, looking grim. Sarah marched straight to the front door and knocked. When Chester answered, she pushed past him into the house. The rest of us followed. Chester's face went white when he saw the crowd of family members filing into his living room. Maya came running up from the basement, tears streaming down her face. She threw herself into Sarah's arms. Her dress was still buttoned properly, her hair still in its ponytail. We'd gotten there in time, but the fear in her eyes told us everything we needed to know about what had almost happened. Chester started backing toward the kitchen, stammering about misunderstandings. James blocked his path. Patricia was already on the phone with Kayla, telling her to get here immediately. I stayed by the door, knowing I couldn't touch my daughter without violating the court order, but I could see her. I could know she was safe. Kayla arrived 20 minutes later, her face flushed with anger. She started screaming the moment she saw me, threatening to call the police. Then she saw Maya clinging to Sarah, saw the circle of family members with their arms crossed, saw Chester cornered in his own living room. Her confident facade cracked. She looked around the room, searching for allies, but found only cold stares. Even the cousins who had blocked me on social media were there, their faces hard with newfound understanding. Patricia spoke first. She told Kayla about the other children who had started coming forward, the strange games Chester wanted to play, the way he always volunteered to babysit alone, the pattern we could all see now, stretching back decades. Kayla's face went from red to white. She kept shaking her head, insisting we were wrong. Chester was family. Chester had helped raise us. Chester would never hurt anyone, but her voice got smaller with each protest. Then Sarah played a recording on her phone. She'd been smart enough to record her daughter's disclosure. The little girl's voice filled the room, describing things no child should know about, things that matched what I disclosed about my own abuse, things that Chester had very specific preferences for. Chester made a break for the back door. James and 2 other cousins blocked him. He started babbling about lawyers, about defamation, about how we were all crazy, but the more he talked, the more guilty he looked. The calm, charming uncle mask had finally slipped. Kayla sank onto the couch, Maya still clinging to Sarah across the room. I watched my sister's worldview shatter in real time. Every family photo in Chester's living room seemed to mock her. Every gift he'd given her over the years. Every lunch date she'd posted about while calling me a liar. My mother arrived next, followed by 3 more aunts. Word had spread through the family phone tree. Chester's house filled with relatives who had all started connecting dots. Conversations they'd dismissed. Behavior they'd overlooked. Children who had suddenly become withdrawn after spending time with Uncle Chester. The police arrived an hour later, called by Patricia after she'd gathered statements from 5 different family members. They took Chester in for questioning. I watched from the doorway as they led him to the patrol car, his head down, that friendly uncle smile finally gone for good. Kayla still wouldn't look at me. She sat frozen on Chester's couch while Maya was transferred to Sarah's temporary care. The restraining order was still active. I couldn't comfort my own daughter, but at least she was away from him. Over the next few days, more stories emerged. My aunt remembered finding Chester in suspicious situations that she'd explained away. My uncle recalled Chester's insistence on babysitting alone, how he'd always had excuses for why parents should leave. 3 more cousins came forward with their own experiences. I'm trying to understand how Chester managed to manipulate everyone for so long. The way he prepared that fake diary story about the narrator trying to seduce him is so calculated. How did he know exactly which lies would make people doubt her? The fabricated diary never materialized. When pressed, Chester couldn't produce it. Kayla had believed it existed because he'd described it in such detail. He'd spent years planting seeds of doubt about me, preparing for the day I might speak up. He'd groomed Kayla just as thoroughly as he'd groomed his victims, just in a different way. Child Protective Services got involved. They interviewed Maya with specially trained professionals. She was young enough that the full impact hadn't set in, but she confirmed that Chester had been trying to play the same special games he'd played with me, the games I'd spent 8 years protecting Kayla from. My family started reaching out one by one. Apologies came in texts, calls, and tearful visits. My grandmother left me a voicemail sobbing about how sorry she was. My aunts who had sent angry messages now sent supportive ones. The cousins who had blocked me started sharing my posts about childhood abuse awareness. But Kayla remained silent. She moved out of her apartment, quit social media, and threw herself into work. The family members who saw her said she looked hollow. The successful lawyer with the perfect life had built everything on a foundation of lies she'd believed were true. I started supervised visits with Maya at a family center. She ran to me the first time, clinging like she'd never let go. We colored pictures and played games while a social worker took notes. Maya asked why Aunt Kayla didn't visit anymore. I told her Aunt Kayla needed some time to think about things. The investigation into Chester continued. More victims from outside our family started coming forward. Parents from the neighborhood, kids from the youth group he'd volunteered with. The case grew bigger than any of us had imagined. Local news picked it up, though I declined all interviews. This wasn't about vindication, it was about protection. My father finally called after 3 weeks of silence. His voice broke as he apologized. He told me how Chester had convinced them I was troubled, how he'd shown them fake text messages where I supposedly confessed to lying, how he'd manipulated every conversation to make me look unstable. My father had believed it all because it was easier than believing the truth. The custody case moved slowly. Family court required evaluations, home visits, and endless paperwork. I found a small apartment and a steady job. I attended every therapy session, every parenting class, every requirement they set. Sarah and Lily testified on my behalf. Even Patricia wrote a letter to the judge about what she'd witnessed. Chester's house stood empty now, the family photos still on the walls, the basement door locked by police tape. Sometimes I drove by, remembering all those nights I'd walk down those stairs so Kayla wouldn't have to. All those times I'd protected her from the monster she'd later defend. 3 months after that first phone call from Lily, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Kayla, just 2 words. I'm sorry. I stared at it for an hour before responding. I told her I loved her, that I always had, that everything I'd done had been to keep her safe. She didn't reply. The extended family started healing in their own ways. Support groups formed. Cousins who had never been close began talking. The shame and silence that had protected Chester for decades finally broke. We learned that his own siblings had suspected something but never spoke up, that his wife had left him years ago for reasons she'd never explained, that there had been signs everywhere, ignored or explained away. Maya started therapy with a specialist in childhood trauma. She was resilient, the therapist said. The intervention had come just in time. She drew pictures of our family, always putting me next to her. She never drew Aunt Kayla anymore. When asked about Uncle Chester, she just shook her head and changed the subject. I kept waiting for Kayla to reach out again, to show up at a hearing, to fight for Maya, but she stayed away. Family members reported seeing her at work, functioning, but changed. The confident lawyer who'd called me a liar now walked with her head down. She'd lost more than just her worldview. She'd lost the childhood she thought she'd had. The restraining order hearing came up 2 weeks later. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, watching Kayla arrive with her lawyer. She wore the same navy suit she'd worn to every important event since law school. Her hair was perfectly styled, but dark circles shadowed her eyes. She walked past me without acknowledgement, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Sarah sat beside me holding my hand. She'd taken time off work to support me. Patricia was there too, along with Lily and 3 other cousins who'd witnessed Chester's behavior over the years. We'd all written statements. We'd all prepared to testify about what we'd seen, what we'd ignored, what we now understood. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Kayla's lawyer argued that I was unstable, that my accusations had torn the family apart, that I posed a threat to her safety. My lawyer countered with witness statements, therapy records, and documentation of Maya's disclosure to Child Protective Services. The judge listened to everything, taking notes, asking pointed questions about the timeline of events. When the judge lifted the restraining order, Kayla's composure finally broke. She stood abruptly, knocking papers off the table. Her lawyer grabbed her arm, whispering urgently. She shook him off and stormed out of the courtroom. I followed her into the hallway, Sarah close behind me. Kayla was leaning against the wall by the elevators, her face in her hands. When she heard my footsteps, she looked up. Her makeup had smeared. The confident lawyer facade was completely gone. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and jabbed the elevator button repeatedly. I wanted to reach out to her, to tell her it wasn't her fault, that Chester had manipulated us both. But the elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside without looking back. Sarah squeezed my shoulder as we watched the doors close. The custody evaluation process intensified after the restraining order was lifted. A court-appointed evaluator visited my apartment 3 times, observing how I'd set up Maya's room with her favorite purple bedding and the bookshelf I'd filled with her beloved picture books. She interviewed my neighbors, my employer, my therapist. She reviewed every document, every text message, every piece of evidence from the past months. Kayla fought the evaluation process at first. She filed motions to delay, arguing that the system was biased against her. But her arguments grew weaker as more family members sided with me. Even our mother began to waver, especially after Patricia cornered her at a family gathering and laid out the timeline of Chester's behavior with brutal clarity. During this time, I learned that Chester had been released after questioning. Without Maya's direct testimony, which the prosecutor wouldn't pursue given her age and trauma, they couldn't hold him. He was staying with a friend across town, banned from family gatherings by unanimous agreement, but I knew he was still out there, still dangerous. I started documenting everything obsessively. Every interaction with family members went into a notebook. Every supervised visit with Maya was recorded in detail. I took photos of the activities we did together, the way she smiled when she saw me, the drawings she made of us together, building a case not just for court, but for Maya to understand someday. Sarah became my lifeline during those months. She drove me to appointments, helped me prepare for hearings, and most importantly, she talked to Kayla. As one of the few family members Kayla still spoke to, Sarah became an unofficial mediator. She'd report back on Kayla's state of mind, her gradual acceptance of the truth, her growing horror at what she'd enabled. The breakthrough came during a supervised visit in early December. Maya and I were making paper snowflakes when she suddenly started talking about Uncle Chester. She described how he'd tried to play the special basement game, how she'd been scared, how she'd wanted me. The social worker took careful notes while I held my daughter, fighting to keep my expression neutral and supportive. That night, Sarah called with news. Kayla had been to therapy. Her therapist had helped her recognize the grooming patterns, the way Chester had cultivated her as his defender from childhood. She was beginning to understand how he'd used her love and trust as weapons against me. The fabricated diary story was unraveling in her mind. My mother showed up at my apartment the next week. She stood in my doorway, looking older than I'd ever seen her. She'd brought photo albums from our childhood. We sat on my secondhand couch, going through pictures of Kayla and me as children. Pictures where Chester lurked in the background. Pictures where I stood between him and Kayla, my child face serious and watchful. She pointed to a photo from Kayla's 7th birthday party. I was 9, standing behind Kayla's chair while Chester helped her blow out candles. My hand was on her shoulder, protective even then. My mother traced our faces with her finger, tears falling onto the plastic album cover. She apologized for not seeing it, for not protecting me, for choosing the easier lie. The custody hearing was set for January. My lawyer was optimistic. The evaluation had gone well. Maya's therapist supported reunification. Multiple family members would testify on my behalf. Even Chester's absence spoke volumes. He disappeared after learning about Maya's disclosure, leaving town without forwarding address. But Kayla still had custody, and she was spiraling. Sarah reported that she'd taken leave from her law firm. She'd stopped returning calls from friends. She spent most days in her apartment, surrounded by childhood photos and home videos, trying to reconcile her memories with the truth she could no longer deny. Chester's sudden inability to produce this diary he described in such detail raises questions about what else he might have fabricated over the years to protect himself. I worried about Maya during those weeks. The supervised visits showed she was adjusting, but she was quieter than before. She'd lost weight. She had nightmares. The therapist assured me this was normal, that children were resilient, that consistent love and support would help her heal. But I ached for all the bedtimes I was missing, all the morning hugs, all the moments stolen by Chester's manipulation. 2 weeks before the custody hearing, Patricia organized a family meeting. She didn't tell Kayla it was happening. She just gathered everyone who'd been affected by Chester's actions. Cousins I hadn't seen in years showed up. Aunts who'd sent angry messages came with apologies. Even my grandmother, frail but determined, made the trip. We sat in Patricia's living room, sharing stories, not just about Chester, but about the patterns we'd missed, how he'd always volunteered for childcare, how children's behavior changed after spending time with him, how he'd cultivated different relationships with different family members, keeping us all isolated in our own versions of him. My cousin Catherine, whom I barely knew, broke down describing how Chester had tried to babysit her daughter years ago. She'd felt uncomfortable but couldn't explain why. Now she understood that my constant volunteering to help Chester with errands had kept him busy and away from her child. She thanked me through tears. The meeting lasted hours. By the end, we'd identified at least a dozen children Chester had tried to access over the years. Most had been protected by lucky circumstances, or, we now realized, by my interventions. But there were gaps in our timeline. Children who'd spent time alone with him. Behavioral changes we'd attributed to other things. Patricia compiled everything into a document. Not for court, she said, but for the family. So we'd never forget. So we'd never let someone like Chester infiltrate our lives again. She made copies for everyone, including one for Kayla, though we didn't know if she'd read it. The week before the custody hearing, I got another text from Kayla. This time it was longer. She wanted to meet. She suggested a coffee shop downtown, neutral ground. Sarah offered to come with me, but I knew this was something I had to do alone. I arrived early, choosing a corner table where I could see the door. Kayla came in 10 minutes late, wearing jeans and a wrinkled sweater. I'd never seen her in public looking so disheveled. She ordered tea with shaking hands, then sat across from me, staring at the table. We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, she pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were documents from Chester. Not the fabricated diary, but emails and text messages he'd sent her over the years. Messages where he subtly planted doubts about me, where he suggested I was troubled, jealous, attention-seeking, where he built the narrative that would protect him if I ever spoke up. She spread them across the table, her hands trembling. She pointed to dates, showing how they aligned with times I'd kept other children away from him, how he'd started his campaign against me when I was still a child myself, how thoroughly he'd prepared her to defend him. She told me about her therapy sessions, about uncovering memories she'd suppressed, small things that hadn't made sense at the time, how I'd always insist on going with Chester on errands, how I'd get upset when he offered to take her places alone, how I'd lock her door during his visits, telling her it was a game. She described the moment she'd finally understood, how all the pieces had clicked together during a therapy session, how she'd run to the bathroom and vomited, how she'd called in sick to work for a week, unable to function with the weight of what she'd done to me, what she'd allowed to happen to Maya. She reached across the table but stopped short of touching my hand. She said she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She knew she didn't deserve it, but she wanted me to know that she would support me at the custody hearing, that she would tell the truth, that she would make sure Maya came home to me. I watched my sister crumble in that coffee shop. The successful lawyer who'd had everything figured out was gone. In her place was someone trying to rebuild their entire understanding of the world. I wanted to comfort her, but I also needed to protect myself. Too much damage had been done. The custody hearing arrived with unexpected snow. I stood outside the courthouse watching flakes fall on the steps where Kayla had called me a liar months before. Sarah, Lily, Patricia, and 6 other family members flanked me. We walked in together, a united front that would have been impossible to imagine when this all started. Kayla was already inside with her lawyer. She'd dressed professionally this time, but the confident posture was gone. When she saw our group, something shifted in her face. Not surprise, but relief, like she'd been holding her breath and could finally exhale. The hearing began with testimony from the evaluator. She detailed her observations, Maya's progress, my stability and preparedness. She recommended immediate reunification with a transition period. Kayla's lawyer didn't object. In fact, he seemed to have very little to say. When it was Kayla's turn to speak, she stood slowly. She looked at the judge, then at me, then back at the judge. She withdrew her custody petition. She admitted to making mistakes in judgment. She confirmed that she supported Maya returning to my care. She acknowledged that she'd been wrong about Chester, about me, about everything. The judge granted me full custody with a transition plan. Maya would spend the next week doing extended visits, then move home permanently. Kayla would have supervised visitation rights, which she said she didn't plan to exercise until she'd done more therapy work. She wanted to be safe for Maya, she said. She wanted to break the cycle. After the the hearing, our family group celebrated quietly in the courthouse cafeteria. Kayla had left immediately, but she'd done what she promised. She'd told the truth. She'd given me back my daughter. It wasn't enough to erase the months of pain, but it was a start. That evening, I prepared Maya's room for her return. I hung new curtains, arranged her stuffed animals, put fresh sheets on her bed. Sarah helped me organize her clothes, which Kayla had sent over in labeled boxes. Everything was clean and folded, organized by size and season. Even in her breakdown, Kayla's perfectionist tendencies remained. The transition week passed in a blur of joy and adjustment. Maya was cautious at first, testing boundaries, making sure I was really staying. By the third day, she was laughing again. By the fifth, she was sleeping through the night. By the seventh, she was home. Our first morning together, I woke to find her standing by my bed, watching me sleep. When I opened my eyes, she climbed in beside me, curling into my side like she had as a toddler. We lay there as snow fell outside, safe and together, beginning the long journey of healing. The family dynamics shifted dramatically after the custody hearing. Chester's name became synonymous with betrayal. Those who defended him most strongly now felt the deepest shame. Support groups formed organically, cousins reaching out to cousins, aunts checking on nieces, a network of vigilance replacing the previous silence. I heard through Sarah that Kayla had started specialized therapy for family members of offenders. She was learning about grooming, about complicity, about the ways predators manipulate entire family systems. She was doing the work, but she was doing it alone. The family that had once celebrated her success now didn't know how to interact with her. 3 months after Maya came home, I found a package on my doorstep. No return address, but I recognized Kayla's handwriting. Inside was a leather journal and a letter. The letter explained that she'd started writing down her real memories, not the fabricated story Chester had fed her, but the truth as she now understood it. The journal entries went back to our childhood. She wrote about moments she'd misunderstood, times I'd protected her without her knowing. She remembered the night I'd told her about the locked door game, how excited she'd been to have a special secret with her big sister. She remembered Chester bringing her gifts after those nights, not knowing they were rewards for my silence. She wrote about college, when I'd seemed distant and troubled while she thrived. She thought I was jealous of her success. Now she understood I was drowning in trauma while she lived the life I'd sacrificed to give her. She wrote about introducing boyfriends to Chester, seeking his approval, never knowing why I always found excuses to avoid those dinners. The most painful entries were recent. She described the moment she'd realized she'd given Chester access to Maya, how she'd replayed every interaction, every red flag she'd missed or dismissed, how she'd considered ending her own life before deciding that living with the guilt was the punishment she deserved. I kept the journal but didn't respond. I wasn't ready for that conversation. Maybe I never would be, but I appreciated knowing that she understood, that she was grappling with the truth, that she wasn't hiding behind denial anymore. Spring arrived with unexpected warmth. Maya started kindergarten at a new school where no one knew our story. She made friends quickly, her natural joy returning as the months passed. She still had therapy once a week, but the nightmares had stopped. She drew pictures of our family that no longer included Uncle Chester or Aunt Kayla. I'd returned to work full-time, finding stability and routine. My colleagues didn't know the details of what we'd been through, only that I'd had a custody situation. They celebrated when Maya came home, bringing casseroles and hand-me-down clothes, the ordinary kindness of people who didn't need to know the whole story to offer support. The way Kayla's body language changed from confident lawyer to someone who couldn't even hold her tea steady shows how much discovering the truth broke her entire sense of reality. What makes people completely reconstruct their understanding of someone they trusted? The extended family continued to heal in fits and starts. Some relationships were irreparably broken. Others grew stronger through shared recognition of failure. Patricia emerged as an unofficial family leader, organizing gatherings that felt different from before, safer, more intentional, with clear rules about supervision and accountability. I learned that Chester had moved several states away. He'd found work at a hardware store, telling people he'd retired early from a successful career. No one there knew about the investigation, about the family he'd lost, about the children he'd hurt. The knowledge that he was out there, potentially accessing new victims, haunted all of us. Some cousins wanted to warn his new community. Others feared legal repercussions. The debate raged in family group texts and tense phone calls. Without formal charges, we had no clear path forward. We could only control our own family, our own vigilance, our own commitment to believing children. 6 months after the custody hearing, my father asked to have lunch. We met at a quiet restaurant, both of us awkward with the weight of unspoken words. He'd aged visibly since this all began. The man who'd shaken his head in disappointment now looked haunted by his own failures. He talked about his childhood, about the uncle who'd made him uncomfortable, about the way families protected predators without meaning to. He said he'd been in therapy too, unpacking why he'd found it easier to believe I was lying than to accept that Chester was dangerous. He cried over soup and sandwiches. This man who'd never shown emotion throughout my childhood. He asked about Maya, about how she was adjusting. He wanted to be a better grandfather than he'd been a father. He understood if I needed time, if trust had to be rebuilt slowly. He was willing to do whatever it took. The conversation didn't fix everything, but it cracked open a door I'd thought was permanently closed. Summer brought unexpected challenges. Maya started having questions about why she couldn't see Aunt Kayla anymore. She remembered the fun times, the gifts, the attention. She didn't understand why someone who'd loved her had disappeared. The therapist helped me navigate these conversations, keeping them age-appropriate while still honest. I decided to drive by Kayla's apartment one evening, not to make contact, just to see. Her car was in the parking lot covered in pollen. The blinds were drawn. Mail overflowed from her box. Sarah had mentioned that Kayla was still on leave from work, living off savings, barely leaving home. Part of me wanted to knock on her door, to tell her that isolating herself wasn't helping anyone, that Maya asked about her, that the family needed to see her taking accountability, not hiding. But I drove away without stopping. She had to find her own path to redemption, if one existed. The anniversary of my disclosure approached with unexpected anxiety. A full year since I'd spoken the truth and blown up our family's careful facade. I marked it quietly, taking Maya to the park where she fed ducks and chased butterflies, blissfully unaware of the significance of the date. That night, after Maya was asleep, I sat with my journal and wrote my own entry. Not about Chester or Kayla or the family drama, but about Maya, about the way she laughed with her whole body, about her obsession with dinosaurs, about the songs she made up in the bathtub, about all the ordinary, precious moments I'd almost lost. The next morning brought a surprise. My grandmother called, asking if she could visit. She'd been one of Chester's strongest defenders initially, and we'd barely spoken since. But she was 93, she said, and running out of time to make things right. She arrived with a box of old photos and documents. She'd been going through family history, she explained, and found something important. Pictures of Chester as a young man, always surrounded by children, always volunteering for youth groups, always being praised for his dedication to kids. The pattern went back decades. She also brought letters, correspondence between family members from the 1970s and 80s, discussing concerns about Chester that were dismissed or explained away, a cousin who'd moved across the country after her daughter spent a summer with him, an aunt who'd forbidden him from babysitting but never said why. The evidence had always been there, scattered and silenced. We spent the afternoon going through everything. My grandmother's Maya's weathered hands shaking as she turned pages. She apologized for not believing me, for contributing to the culture of silence that had protected Chester for so long. She said she wanted to document everything before she died, to leave a record that couldn't be ignored or forgotten. As summer turned to fall, life settled into new rhythms. Maya started first grade, proud of her new backpack and light-up shoes. I'd gotten a promotion at work, finally able to provide stability without constant financial stress. The supervised visits at the family center were a distant memory, replaced by ordinary bedtimes and homework battles. Sarah remained my closest ally, but our relationship had evolved beyond crisis support. We had normal conversations now about movies and recipes and her dating life. She'd stopped being my liaison to Kayla, respecting the boundaries I'd set. The family drama was no longer the center of our friendship. The holidays approached with complicated feelings. Patricia was organizing Thanksgiving, deliberately creating new traditions. Chester's absence would be palpable but unmentioned. Kayla's empty chair would raise questions from younger cousins who didn't know the full story. We were all learning how to navigate family gatherings with massive wounds still healing. I decided to host a small Friendsgiving instead. Just Maya and me, Sarah and Lily, and a few colleagues who'd become friends. We made turkey handprints and ate too much pie and played board games until Maya fell asleep on the couch. It was simple and safe and ours. The week after Friendsgiving, I received an unexpected phone call from my cousin Sebastian. He'd been living overseas for years and had just returned home. He explained that his mother had filled him in on everything that had happened with Chester. He wanted to help however he could. Sebastian arrived at my apartment the next evening with a laptop and a determined expression. He worked in cybersecurity and had discovered something troubling. Chester had created new social media profiles under different names. He was volunteering at a youth center in his new town, posting photos with children, building the same trusted reputation he'd cultivated with our family. We spent hours documenting everything. Sebastian showed me how to archive the posts, how to trace the connections between Chester's old and new identities. He helped me organize all the evidence our family had gathered into a secure digital file, not for any legal purpose, but as protection for the future. Maya interrupted our work, padding out in her pajamas to ask for water. Sebastian's face softened when he saw her. He'd never met her before, had only seen photos. She studied him curiously before deciding he was safe, then showed him her favorite dinosaur book. I watched them interact, grateful for family members who understood the importance of vigilance. The next morning, Patricia called an emergency family meeting. She'd received disturbing news from a friend who lived in Chester's new town. A mother there had noticed her daughter's behavior changing after Chester started tutoring her. The same withdrawal, the same reluctance to be alone with him, the same patterns we'd all missed or dismissed for decades. 20 family members gathered in Patricia's living room that afternoon. The debate was fierce. Some wanted to contact the authorities in Chester's new location. Others worried about legal ramifications without concrete evidence. A few suggested hiring a private investigator. The room buzzed with frustrated energy and shared guilt. My grandmother stood up slowly, using her cane for support. She reminded us that we'd failed to protect children once before by staying silent. She pulled out the documentation she'd been compiling, decades of missed warning signs and dismissed concerns. Her voice shook, but her message was clear. We couldn't let it happen again. The group reached a compromise. Sebastian would help create an anonymous tip website where people could report concerns about Chester. Patricia would reach out to child safety organizations for guidance. Sarah would connect with the mother who'd noticed the behavior changes, offering support without making accusations. Everyone had a role. Everyone had a purpose. I drove home feeling something shift inside me. For months, I'd been focused on protecting Maya, on rebuilding our life. But there were other children out there, other families who didn't know what we knew. The weight of that knowledge was heavy, but it was shared now. We were no longer silent. Maya's school called the next day. She'd been having trouble concentrating in class, asking repeatedly when she could go home. When I picked her up early, she clung to me in the parking lot. Her teacher mentioned that Maya had been talking about bad dreams again, about basements and locked doors. That evening, I found Maya arranging her stuffed animals in a protective circle around her bed. She explained matter-of-factly that they were guards, keeping the bad people away. My heart broke watching her 6-year-old mind trying to process trauma she should never have experienced. I helped her position each animal carefully, understanding her need for control. Sarah came over after Maya fell asleep. We sat on my couch, sharing a bottle of wine and discussing the family meeting. She mentioned that she'd finally convinced Kayla to attend a support group for family members of abuse victims. Kayla had gone to one meeting, sat in the back, and left without speaking to anyone, but she'd gone. That was something. The anonymous tip website went live 3 days later. Sebastian had built it carefully, ensuring it couldn't be traced back to our family while still providing a way for people to share concerns. Within hours, 2 people had submitted reports about Chester's behavior in his new community. The patterns were identical to what we'd experienced. Patricia worked tirelessly with child safety organizations, learning the proper channels for reporting concerns across state lines. She discovered that Chester had been flagged in their internal systems years ago, but without formal charges, the information had never been acted upon. She began building relationships with advocates who understood the complexities of our situation. My father started attending the family meetings. He sat quietly in the corner, absorbing the discussions about protection and prevention. One evening, he approached me afterward, holding a check. He wanted to contribute to Maya's therapy costs. He understood if I didn't want his money, but he needed to do something tangible. I accepted it, recognizing his need to help. December brought its own challenges. The school holiday concert was approaching, and parents were encouraged to attend. Maya practiced her songs every night, but she kept asking if bad people would be there. I assured her that only mommies and daddies and safe people would come, but her anxiety was palpable. The night of the concert, I sat in the auditorium surrounded by other parents. Maya spotted me from the stage and waved enthusiastically. For a moment, she was just a regular first grader, excited about singing for her mom. Then I noticed her scanning the crowd, her little face tense until she confirmed that only familiar, safe faces were present. After the concert, several parents approached me. Word had somehow spread about our situation, despite my efforts to keep it private. They offered support, shared their own stories of family trauma, and promised to watch out for Maya. The community was smaller than I'd realized, and secrets didn't stay hidden long. Catherine, the cousin I'd barely known before all this, became a regular presence in our lives. She brought her daughter over for playdates with Maya, understanding intuitively that normal childhood experiences were healing. The girls built pillow forts and had tea parties while Catherine and I sat nearby, vigilant but trying not to hover. One afternoon, while the girls played, Catherine shared something she'd never told anyone. Chester had tried to groom her when she was young, but her mother had noticed and intervened. They'd never spoken about it, just quietly ensured Catherine was never alone with him. She wondered now how many other silent interventions had occurred over the years. The tip website Sebastian created began receiving more submissions. Stories from Chester's new community painted a familiar picture. He was charming, helpful, always available to babysit or tutor. Parents trusted him immediately. Children's behavior changed gradually. The pattern was so consistent it was chilling. Patricia compiled the information carefully, working with legal advisors to understand what could be shared with authorities. Without direct evidence of abuse, our options were limited, but patterns of concerning behavior could be documented. Red flags could be raised, raised, and communities could be warned to stay vigilant. I struggled with the weight of knowing Chester was out there, potentially hurting other children. Some nights after Maya was asleep, I'd sit at my computer researching legal options. But every avenue led to the same conclusion. Without a child willing to testify, without physical evidence, without formal charges, he remained free. The family meetings evolved into something more structured. Patricia created subcommittees focused on different aspects of child protection. Some members researched best practices for preventing abuse. Others worked on creating educational materials for parents. Everyone channeled their guilt and anger into action. My mother joined the education committee. She threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised everyone. She created pamphlets about recognizing grooming behaviors, about believing children, about the ways predators manipulate entire families, her way of atoning perhaps for not believing me. January arrived with bitter cold. Maya had good days and bad days. Sometimes she was a typical 6-year-old, laughing at cartoons and begging for extra dessert. Other times she'd freeze at unexpected sounds or refuse to go into rooms with closed doors. Her therapist assured me this was normal, that healing wasn't linear. I got a call from Kayla's therapist. She couldn't share details, but she wanted me to know that Kayla was making progress. She was working through her role in enabling Chester, processing the ways he'd manipulated her from childhood. The therapist asked if I'd consider joint sessions in the future. I said I'd think about it. The family's work began bearing fruit. The child safety organization Patricia partnered with created a workshop based on our experiences. They invited family members to share their stories anonymously, building a case study about how predators operate within families. It was painful but necessary work. Sebastian's monitoring of Chester's online activity revealed something alarming. He'd started a tutoring business, advertising specifically to single mothers who needed affordable childcare. The marketing was sophisticated, the references fabricated but convincing. He was adapting, learning from what had exposed him in our family. An emergency family meeting was called. The room crackled with urgency as Sebastian presented his findings. Chester wasn't just continuing his patterns, he was refining them. He'd learned from our intervention and was creating new ways to access vulnerable children. The discussion went late into the night. Some family members wanted to take direct action. Others counseled patience and proper channels. The debate grew heated until my grandmother spoke again. She reminded us that acting rashly could backfire, could give Chester ammunition to paint us as a vindictive family harassing him. We needed to be smart, strategic. The compromise involved multiple approaches. Sebastian would document everything meticulously. Patricia would share the information with law enforcement in Chester's area, even if they couldn't act immediately. Sarah would reach out to parent groups in that community, sharing general safety information without naming Chester directly. I watched my family transform from silent enablers to active protectors. It wasn't perfect. There were still disagreements, still moments of paralysis, but the culture of silence that had protected Chester for decades was broken. In its place grew something fierce and protective. Maya's 7th birthday approached. She wanted a dinosaur party, just family and a few close friends. As I planned the celebration, I thought about Kayla's 7th birthday, the photo my mother had shown me, how I'd stood guard even then, my hand protective on her shoulder. Some things hadn't changed. The morning of the party, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a stuffed dinosaur and a card in Kayla's handwriting. For the bravest girl I know, love, Aunt Kay. Maya hugged the dinosaur tightly, asking if Aunt Kayla was coming to the party. I explained that she couldn't make it, but was thinking of her. The party was small but joyful. Maya laughed as she opened presents, her face painted like a T-Rex. Sarah helped serve cake while Lily organized games. Patricia took photos, documenting happy moments to balance all the difficult ones. For a few hours, we were just a normal family celebrating a child's birthday. That night, after everyone left and Maya was asleep clutching her new dinosaur, I sat in the quiet of my apartment. The journey from that family meeting where Kayla called me a liar felt like a lifetime. Everything had changed, but in some ways, nothing had. Chester was still free. The trauma remained. The work continued. But Maya was safe. She was home. She was healing. And our family, broken and imperfect as it was, had chosen protection over silence. We'd learned the hardest way possible that the truth, however painful, was better than the comfortable lie. That knowledge would guide us forward, one careful step at a time. Thanks for reading this story with me. I hope you have a wonderful day.